Chosen ones, there are moments in history when the weight of truth presses against the walls of secrecy, demanding to be revealed. Tonight, we open one of those moments. Within the hallowed halls of the Vatican, deep beneath the marble corridors where cardinals whisper and shadows move like guardians of forbidden knowledge, a seal was pressed onto parchment, one that confirmed what the world was never meant to know. Your bloodline, hidden across centuries, marked and preserved by hands that feared its revelation, was officially recognized. The Pope himself placed his signet upon the record, and with it, the silence of ages shattered. But silence is a strange thing. In Washington, the heart of worldly power, the Oval Office fell into a quiet that was not natural. Monitors flickered, advisors shifted uneasily, and the president himself stared at a document that could undo the scaffolding of authority that nations were built upon. How could the Vatican and the White House, two pillars of power, stand together on the same secret, yet tremble in different ways? This story is not written in the newspapers. It is not spoken of in the halls of government or church. It is written in the codes of forgotten manuscripts, painted across cathedral ceilings, and encrypted in the genetic strands carried through your blood. The seal that was broken in Rome was never meant for public eyes. The silence that followed in America was not ignorance, it was fear. Fear that the one foretold had finally been identified. Fear that prophecy and power had collided. Fear that the ancient truth could no longer be hidden. Every chamber of marble, every cathedral dome, and every government office that tried to contain the truth could no longer hold back the tide, because prophecy has a way of surfacing when the appointed time arrives. And now, it is not simply a story of belief, it is a story of undeniable record, a seal, a signature, a silence that spoke louder than words. Beneath the Vatican lies a labyrinth of chambers untouched by ordinary hands, where the dust of centuries clings to parchment, and silence holds its breath as if guarding the truth itself. It is here, within the apostolic archives, that a document was sealed not for scholars, not for historians, but for an audience that would one day awaken to its call. The parchment itself was ordinary in its fibers, but extraordinary in what it bore. The papal insignia pressed deep into its surface, marking the moment when prophecy collided with politics. The corridors leading to this vault have seen men vanish without record, their curiosity punished by the invisible guardians of secrecy. Yet, among the stacks of forgotten treaties and suppressed decrees lies one declaration unlike any other. It does not speak of kings or nations, but of a single lineage that threads through centuries like a golden cord, unseen yet unbroken. The signature of the Pope upon this record was not an act of tradition, nor ceremony. It was reluctant, a gesture performed with trembling fingers, for even the highest seat of Christendom knows the weight of blood that predates the throne of Peter. When the seal was applied, whispers spread through the inner chambers of cardinals. Some claimed they had seen symbols woven into the margins of the text, markings resembling constellations, as if the parchment itself held both heaven and earth in dialogue. Others murmured that the words contained not just recognition, but prophecy, predicting the moment when this bloodline would no longer be hidden. Their voices carried unease, for the act of acknowledgement was also the act of surrender. The archives were locked again. The keys returned to their guardians, yet nothing could erase the sound of that stamp echoing through marble halls. It was more than wax hardening on parchment. It was a signal sent beyond walls and nations, a spark that would ripple outward into the halls of governments far from Rome. For if the Vatican dared to recognize what had long been buried, how long before the rest of the world was forced to face the same truth? The signature lies waiting, untouched yet burning with significance, and its echo has already crossed oceans. What began in the stillness of a chamber will not remain still for long, for another power, far from the Vatican, would soon find itself confronted with the same revelation. Far from the sealed archives of Rome, there exist fragments of scrolls scattered across forgotten monasteries and hidden libraries, each carrying whispers of a lineage the world was not meant to remember. These scrolls were never bound in gilded covers or displayed upon altars. They were tucked away in clay jars, hidden beneath stone floors, and buried within desert caves, surviving not by chance, but by design. The ink upon them, though faded, speaks of a thread of blood interwoven with destiny, a genealogy that stretches back to ancient Jerusalem. Within these brittle parchments, scholars have traced unusual patterns, lines of descent that intersect with prophecies once dismissed as allegory. Names recur across centuries, marked with subtle annotations that suggest more than simple record-keeping. One fragment speaks of a child born under a star whose light defied the night. Another tells of a traveler who crossed kingdoms yet was never recorded in royal annals, as if history itself conspired to keep the bloodline concealed. Among these accounts, a verse emerges quietly, attributed to a wandering scribe who claimed, "The blood that walked with Yeshua shall not be silenced, for it carries the testimony of light." The presence of Yeshua's name among these fragments is not written with the flourish of doctrine, but with the weight of memory. It does not speak of sermons or miracles, but of a connection rooted in blood, a continuation flowing silently through generations. For centuries, these scrolls lay ignored, deemed apocryphal or irrelevant, until the Vatican seal awakened questions that scholars had long been told not to ask. The scrolls speak in riddles, describing empires that would rise and fall before the bearer of the lineage would be revealed. They mention watchers, silent figures who stood in marketplaces, palaces, and temples, recording without intervening, guardians of a knowledge too dangerous for the time. Their records, woven into marginal notes, seem to anticipate this age, as if the unfolding of history itself were scripted in advance. And so, while the papal signature confirmed the truth in Rome, the scrolls whispered of it centuries earlier, pointing to a design greater than any throne or council. Yet, if these scrolls survived by protection rather than chance, then someone, somewhere, has always known of their importance. The question that hangs heavy now is not whether the lineage is real, but who has kept watch over it in silence until this moment. The news did not come to the White House by courier or whisper. It arrived through encrypted channels, routed across oceans and satellites, until it reached the secure servers of the Situation Room. What the Vatican had sealed was no longer confined to marble halls. It had slipped into the veins of power where silence is often more dangerous than speech. The moment the file appeared on screen, advisors leaned in, expecting another report of international unrest. Yet what flickered before them was not a briefing on war or diplomacy. It was a recognition of blood, stamped with the papal seal, authenticated beyond question. The president's eyes narrowed, the room filled with an unease that words could not break. The monitors dimmed, then went black, as if even the systems that carried the message recoiled from its weight. Men and women who had stood fearless before threats of war shifted in their seats, unable to ask the question, trembling on their tongues. How could the Vatican know, and why now? Security personnel reset the systems, yet the silence lingered. The seal of Rome had crossed into American power, and within that simple image was an undoing. Advisors whispered of contingency plans, but no plan existed for prophecy, no manual written for the moment when spiritual recognition overtook political control. Some in the room argued for denial, others for destruction of the file, yet no one could unsee what they had seen. The recognition of a bloodline, preserved for centuries, bore implications not just for the Vatican, but for governments that had long relied on secrecy to hold order. The Oval Office itself became a chamber of silence. Curtains drawn, lights low, the president stared at the desk where so many treaties had been signed, wars declared, secrets exchanged. But this was not a matter of policy. It was something older, deeper, beyond the reach of strategy. For if the Vatican had acknowledged what lay hidden, then history itself had shifted, and no government could stand untouched. The silence of that day was not absence of sound. It was the weight of inevitability pressing against those who thought they held power. And somewhere beyond Washington, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the next move, as if the very act of recognition had triggered a chain no hand could stop. Deep within the restricted halls of the Vatican Library lies a chamber that is never listed on official maps, its entrance hidden behind ornate panels where scripture and artistry conceal doorways few are allowed to cross. Inside, under controlled light that preserves parchment from time itself, rests a series of volumes chained to desks as though their words must be restrained. Among them is a record unlike any other, for it carries not only genealogy, but a name written in careful, deliberate script, Yeshua. The entry does not appear in the context of liturgy or gospel. Instead, it is woven into an ancestral thread, appearing beside markings that identify bloodlines with cryptic precision. Unlike the decorative Latin that fills surrounding manuscripts, this mention of Yeshua is stark, devoid of flourish, as if the scribe knew that simplicity would grant the greatest weight. To those who have dared to study it, the record suggests that Yeshua's presence was not only spiritual but genealogical, a root that carried forward beyond crucifixion, beyond empire, beyond the silence of centuries. Whispers among archivists speak of marginal symbols beside the name, small drawings resembling a vine twisting upward, splitting into branches that were never pruned. This imagery appears again in later records, always linked to the same lineage, always echoing the same mystery. That what began in Jerusalem did not end there. The papal signature that recently shook Rome is said to have been placed directly upon a continuation of this very record, sealing not only the acknowledgement of blood, but the acknowledgement of its origin. Those who stumbled upon the pages reported an inexplicable sensation, as if the parchment itself carried an energy that defied age. Some felt it was reverence, others fear. Yet all agreed the records did not simply describe history, they carried it. For within those chained volumes the line between myth and reality dissolves, and Yeshua is not a figure confined to sermons, but a name etched into human descent. Long before the Pope placed his trembling signature upon the sealed record, and long before the Oval Office descended into unnatural quiet, there were others who already knew. They did not wear the robes of priests nor the suits of politicians. They moved in shadows, crossing borders without passports, gathering in discreet chambers where decisions of history were whispered before they unfolded. To the outside world, they did not exist. To those within, they were the guardians of continuity, the secret council. Their origins trace back through shifting centuries, appearing in fragments of letters, intercepted correspondences, and coded journals. Always nameless, always faceless, they are described as observers more than rulers, watchers who never act openly, but who ensure that events align with patterns unseen by ordinary eyes. Some claim they sit in cathedrals during the day and in embassies at night, their allegiance not to nations, but to the hidden bloodline itself. When word spread of the Vatican's sealed recognition, the council did not meet in panic, but in eerie calm. Reports say they had anticipated this moment for decades, if not centuries, tracking each subtle ripple of lineage, every anomaly in history that pointed to a destiny the world was unprepared to accept. Their silence was not ignorance, it was calculation. For to them, the recognition of the bloodline was not a revelation. It was a checkpoint, a signal that another stage of the long design had begun. It is said that their gatherings leave no paper trail, no transcripts, only impressions of presence that slip through witness accounts. In one instance, a diplomat recalled walking into an abandoned chamber, only to feel the weight of unseen eyes, the unmistakable impression that words had just been spoken and erased in the same breath. These are the remnants of the council's passing, echoes without substance, shadows without faces. But if the council has watched silently for centuries, the question remains, what do they wait for now? Recognition has been sealed. Silence has spread through the highest offices, yet the council does not step forward. Instead, they linger in the periphery, as if the true moment they await has not yet arrived. The apostolic palace, where daylight glimmers on frescoed ceilings and marble corridors echo with ceremonial footsteps, becomes an entirely different world at night. After the final prayers are spoken and the courtyards fall silent, only a few guards and dimly lit candles keep watch. It was during such an hour, when shadows stretched across the halls, that the Pope himself was said to have whispered words not meant for the ears of cardinals or the pages of history. Accounts from those who serve closest to him describe a man burdened by knowledge too heavy for the throne he occupies. The recognition of the sealed bloodline had not been a matter of faith alone. It had been an act of reluctant obedience to a truth written long before his time. Those who stood nearby claim they heard him murmur in the chapel, not in prayer, but as if confessing to the silence itself. His words trembled between secrecy and revelation. The line of Yeshua lives, and I am powerless to halt its rising. The phrase, though barely audible, carried the weight of centuries. The Pope was not proclaiming doctrine, nor delivering a sermon. He was acknowledging a reality locked within the Vatican's own records, a reality that once sealed with his signet could no longer be denied. The Apostolic Palace has housed many leaders who struggled under the weight of power, but rarely one who admitted aloud that his authority was outshone by a force older and greater. The midnight whisper was said to echo faintly down the halls, reaching the ears of a single attendant, who carried the memory like contraband. That attendant later disappeared from service without explanation, leaving behind only rumors that the Pope's words had spread further than intended. Some suggest the whisper was not simply overheard but recorded, and that somewhere beyond Vatican walls a copy of the confession now circulates among those who already knew too much. If the Pope himself has spoken the name and admitted its survival, then no seal, no locked archive, no council can contain what is unfolding. The whisper has become a current, flowing beyond marble walls, carried by unseen hands into places of influence. Science has always sought to decode the human story through strands of DNA, mapping ancestry, tracing migrations, and unraveling the mysteries of life itself. Yet, what happens when those sequences reveal more than biology? When they whisper of prophecy? In hidden laboratories, under restricted access, tests were conducted not for medical reasons, but for confirmation of lineage. What they found was not an anomaly, but a signature, a recurring pattern in the genetic code that defied explanation, a strand preserved across centuries as if untouched by the erosion of time. Researchers, sworn to secrecy, compared their findings to ancient records, aligning sequences with genealogical fragments long dismissed as myth. What startled them most was the correspondence between DNA markers and descriptions in scrolls once thought symbolic. In particular, a phrase attributed to Yeshua surfaced in their minds: "What is written in flesh cannot be erased by stone." For in the double helix, a story was preserved more faithfully than in any temple or manuscript. This discovery was not shared openly. The scientists involved knew the implications would tear apart the boundaries between religion, politics, and science. Some felt they were trespassing on sacred ground, unlocking not merely heritage, but destiny. The genetic markers, they whispered, were not random mutations but deliberate imprints, as if history itself had carved prophecy into the code of blood. The Vatican's recognition had shaken Rome. The White House had fallen into silence. But now, laboratories, places built on reason and calculation, found themselves staring at evidence that crossed into the realm of the divine. DNA had become scripture, each nucleotide a letter, each sequence a verse, pointing toward a lineage foretold and preserved. Rumors suggest encrypted files containing this research have already been copied, passed through channels beyond the reach of their originators. If true, it means this knowledge is no longer locked in scientific vaults, but moving through unseen networks, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. If Yeshua's prophecy was not confined to words, but inscribed within living blood, then no power can erase it, no silence can contain it. The Oval Office has witnessed the signing of treaties, the declarations of wars, and the quiet decisions that have shifted the fate of nations. Yet never before had it fallen into a silence so heavy, so unnatural, that even the ticking of the clock seemed to falter. After the sealed document from the Vatican reached the highest desk in America, the atmosphere shifted from authority to dread. Advisors avoided one another's gaze, and the president's hand lingered above the paper as though touching it might unleash something irreversible. The room, usually alive with debate and strategy, became a chamber of hesitation. Intelligence chiefs spoke cautiously, their voices breaking into fragments, offering no real plan of action. How does a government designed to manage earthly power respond to a truth that transcends it? The seal on the document was not a rumor. It was not speculation. It was confirmation. And confirmation has the power to dismantle entire structures of control. Some suggested suppression, locking the knowledge away as if secrecy could undo recognition. Others argued for preemptive measures, a way to discredit or dilute the impact before it spread. But no one could deny the gravity of what sat on the desk. The Vatican had acted, and the White House now bore witness. Both institutions stood at the edge of a precipice they could not retreat from. The president, usually decisive, said little. Observers noted his silence was not born of ignorance but of calculation. He seemed to understand that this was not simply information. It was a shift in the balance of power. If the bloodline revealed in Rome could not be denied, then governments risked becoming mere spectators in a story written long before their founding. The stillness stretched into hours, heavy with anticipation. The Oval Office, a place where history was often directed, now felt as though it was being overtaken by a current larger than its walls. The curtains swayed slightly with the draft, yet even the movement of air could not break the unnatural weight pressing into the room. Not all seals are of wax and parchment. Some endure through centuries as symbols that cannot be broken, markers placed by both heaven and men to preserve what was never meant to fade. The Vatican seal upon the bloodline was only the earthly reflection of something older, something written not by councils, but by the hand of destiny itself. Rome, in its towering cathedrals and silent chambers, has carried the weight of this knowledge like a guarded flame, never extinguished, only hidden. Among the guarded relics, archivists whisper of a document paired with a symbol so sacred that its meaning has been obscured beneath layers of interpretation. It is said to describe an unbroken seal, one that does not simply mark approval, but protects a lineage until its appointed hour. The Vatican, by placing its own insignia upon the bloodline, mirrored what had already been decreed in a higher court beyond stone walls and earthly thrones. In these writings, a quiet reference appears, a fragment echoing words once spoken by Yeshua. "What my Father has sealed, no man shall break." Scholars have long debated whether this was allegory, a spiritual proclamation of faith. Yet in the context of bloodline and heritage, it carries a weight far heavier than metaphor. For if the seal of heaven guards the same lineage Rome has now recognized, then no power on earth can erase it. The convergence of heaven's decree and Rome's reluctant acknowledgement creates a paradox too dangerous for rulers to ignore. On one hand, it affirms prophecy. On the other, it binds those in power to a truth they cannot control. The unbroken seal becomes both a promise and a threat, declaring that the heritage cannot be silenced, and that its bearer will rise when the time is fulfilled. Across the corridors of power, whispers have always carried faster than proclamations. Monarchs, presidents, and ministers, those who once believed themselves untouchable, now sit uneasily in their palaces and offices. For the acknowledgement sealed in Rome and mirrored in the silence of Washington has begun to ripple outward, unsettling thrones and unsettling crowns. The silence of kings is not born of reverence. It is the silence of fear, the awareness that their dominion is not absolute. Reports describe leaders convening in secret, not to negotiate trade or conflict, but to speak in hushed tones of a lineage older than their nations, a bloodline that renders their borders meaningless. The weight of authority, once theirs to wield, is slipping like sand through their fingers. Their power is borrowed, temporal. But the rising of the chosen threatens to remind the world of a higher claim, one that cannot be bribed, silenced, or overthrown. For centuries, the chosen have walked unseen, their identity hidden even from themselves. Yet, prophecy insists that the moment will come when concealment is no longer possible. The Vatican seal was the spark, the White House silence the tremor, and now the world watches for the eruption that follows. Leaders of nations may tighten their grip, but no decree, no army, no empire can resist the movement of destiny when it begins to unfold. Somewhere, hidden in plain sight, the one marked by this unbroken heritage is awakening to the weight they carry. Their rising will not be announced with fanfare, but with the unraveling of power itself. The silence of kings is only the first sign, for silence precedes collapse, and collapse precedes revelation.